see. And I wanted to welcome you all. It's glad that you're here. We this is episode 7 of The Chosen, and this one, in many ways, I can't remember how episode 8. I can't remember all the details of episode 8, but in many ways, I think the whole season has been building toward episode 7, which was Nicodemus. You know, and then also you had Matthew being called too, but Nicodemus there, and so I guess we can just kind of hop right in. So I don't know, Josh, if you wanted to get us started, or if you wanted, or someone can jump in. I'm not sure how y'all want to go.
Well, one thing I loved about this episode was, and I kind of was why did they start the episode this way with Moses and Joshua in the desert?
Yeah.
And Moses making what Joshua was calling the idol. This is the false idol. But I was wondering, I was like, why would they start the episode with this? And I think Moses perfectly wraps it up. Why? When he says, it's not about reasoning, it's about faith. It's not about knowing why, it's about faith. And so it was kind of a setup for what we are to do with Jesus. It's not about knowing everything about what is going on, and not about knowing it all. It's just about having faith. So I loved how they started with that. And then that has a lot to do with the later discussion with Nicodemus, I think. So.
Yeah, and that story, I'm looking at notes here. I don't remember that off the top of my head, the scripture reference, but the story of them in the desert is in Numbers chapter 21. And you might remember there was I don't think it was technically a plague of snakes, but it was certainly a lot of snakes, and people were getting bitten and sick and everything else. And so when Moses fashioned this bronze snake and held it up, what you had to do is look up to the serpent and you would be healed. And so Jesus plays on that in verse 14 of John 3, as Moses lifted up the bronze snake on a pole in the desert, in the same way the Son of Man must be lifted up, so that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. And the Gospels always, and Jesus, but certainly the Gospels and the words of Jesus, you know, they always do a good job of tying this. Jesus is not this new thing on the scene, although he is. It's a continuation of God's faithfulness through the generations. He ties in.
Yeah.
Some things change, some things develop and go further, but this is not the first time God has been at work among the people, you know. Yeah. And so, yeah. And
I also like seeing the origin of the caduceus in medicine. That's pretty cool.
Okay, there you go. You'll have to tell us what that is.
That's just the medical symbol.
Okay.
What the simplicity of it all is what I took away from that very beginning.
Yeah.
All you had to do was just look. You had to take a step and believe. But that's it. There was nothing else. And I found that very powerful thought, because a lot of times we gotta do some ceremonial type thing or do something X, Y, and Z, and we complicate things. I mean, it can't just be this simple. And in reality, God made it pretty simple for us. So the simplicity of it all was just beautiful to me, and thank goodness. So
the one who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Obviously, once you begin to follow, there are a lot of steps in following, but the salvation comes in calling, believing. I just remember the thief on the cross when he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. I mean, just that call to Jesus, and Jesus said, I'll tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. You know, just the call out. It's kind of like just the interior decision of the heart, to follow. And then obviously if the criminal had been released and lived another 40 years, that following would have changed things. He would have followed, but he didn't.
Yeah.
The simplicity. I was just thinking other times, the woman with the issue of blood who just said, if I just get close enough to touch him, and she touched him and she was healed. He was aware of that, and he said, your faith has healed you. I don't know whether that was for her even sort of like superstition. It wasn't much faith. It was just, I hope if I can just touch him, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
And that's amazing how simple it is just to reach out, and he responds. Like you said, it's not a whole lot of ceremonial stuff. It's just simply believing. It's reaching out to him. And if we reach out to him, he'll reach out to us. Mm-hmm. Very simple. Mm-hmm. I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for him to heal Peter's mother-in-law. She's been sick through all 7 episodes.
Yeah. You hear her coughing in the background.
You hear her cough. Right. Tell her to quit coughing. Well, come on.
Yeah.
Trying to film something here.
The simple faith was demonstrated last week when they brought their friends to Jesus. The woman had seen Jesus heal the leper. She had seen it, and Jesus had told the people who saw it, just a handful of people, don't tell anybody, my time's not yet come. But something like that, you have a hard time concealing that and keeping it to yourself. And she saw it with her eyes, and so she believed. She had not worked out this fancy schmancy theology, I'm sure. She just believed this is the chance. This is the chance for him to be healed. In a way, I think the first step of faith is always kind of like that for us. Obviously, as you follow years down the road, it's more complex what you understand and what you know. But the first step is just to, with your heart, say, I trust him. I want to follow him, which I'm not trying to jump ahead. We can jump around however we want to, but I thought you've seen, Nicodemus, all 7 episodes. You've seen his curiosity and his, what has been your impression of his questioning or his, of his character? What have you seen in him that you saw kind of come to fruition, I guess you'd say, in this passage? In this episode.
To me, the most powerful moment was that night when they were talking, and you can see Jesus's invitation to him, follow me. And like Nicodemus list off like 5 or 6 things. I'm too old, or actually Jesus was reading his thoughts, like I'm too old and all this and all that. And you could see that wrestle and that tension. Do I give this up to follow? Because I at this point in the story, I firmly believe when he was kneeling down and he kisses Jesus' hand, at that given moment, he recognized that was the Son of God. But he is still clinging on to traditions, to his what he has known, what is safe for him, and I recognize that struggle. How hard is that to just give up basically everything and just follow? As simple as the command is, that's a very interesting command to give, and ultimately, as we've talked to here, a game changer. And I see that tension inside of him. I'm curious to see what he does in episode 8. Does he go on? Of course, we know the rest of the story, but I'm not doing any spoiler alerts. So, but he plays that very, very well, I think, in that tension, in that moment, and I recognize that, and I can see why that could be so difficult. And I think God's grace in that moment was also seen as he reinvites them. Says, even with all that, come follow me. And I thought that was just the most powerful moment to me. That was my thought. Did I answer that?
Well,
Off subject, Billy.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting that the kind of following Nicodemus did is not the same following Peter did or the same following Matthew did. Matthew handed over the keys and walked away. Peter walked away from the boats and from the nets. James and John from their dad and the hired men. And Nicodemus doesn't walk away that way that we know of. 2 other times we see him. He defends Jesus and he's around, but he's not one of the 12. We don't know how involved he is in the actual day-to-day ministry. And the question kind of came to me is, there are different kinds of following. And I was intrigued, and I don't have the answer to this, but I was intrigued that it seemed like Jesus was very gracious when Nicodemus was following the best he could do in that spot. It seemed like, I mean, I'm reading a lot into it, but just, I don't know what y'all's impressions were, but I mean, Nicodemus was not going to just walk and follow, but he does believe in some way. And he is, what were y'all's impressions of that? Was I reading that wrong?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Jesus said something like, I understand, Nicodemus. I understand the difficulty of this. Mm-hmm. It might not have been those exact words, but that's kind of what he conveyed to him. Said, I see the situation you're in. Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't follow like Matthew does,
no,
as far as we know.
No.
Right. He never does, as far as we know. And I wonder if Jesus wanted him to that way, or if he was inviting him to follow him with his loyalty and to iron that out as he lived his life in the Sanhedrin. I mean, he defends Jesus some in the Gospel of John. So anyway, this is where they do the kind of the poetic license, but it is very interesting how you catch the nuances, and also you recognize how it plays out in your own life and in the lives of people around you.
One thing I thought was interesting in that aspect is Nicodemus's questioning, especially about being born again. And he goes, yeah, my mom, God rest her soul, she's been gone for some time, and this might cause a problem for me. I think it was his way of conveying he didn't understand, but at the same point in time, he needed further clarification. I like that. I like the tone of that. I was like, you know what? That's a good point to bring up, because you're hearing this for the first time. Well, what does that mean to be born again? What are you asking me to actually do here? Inside of his questioning, which was also very interesting, and the way the character portrayed Nicodemus. I thought it really rang home. I would ask that question, maybe throwing a little bit of humor in there. So I'm not insulting, but still trying to get to the point of what are we really talking about,
We toss those words around. If you've grown up in the church, which I think all of us have, we toss the words around, and sometimes we don't necessarily. I wonder if tossing the words around makes it harder for somebody who doesn't know the lingo to be able to understand, because Jesus was trying to explain it to him. No, I mean, that's the first time anyone had ever heard the term born again or born anew or born afresh, which is what Jesus would have said. That would have been the first time he would have ever heard that. First time that's ever been talked about. So it'd be like you hearing a word that you've never heard before, or 2 words put together that have never been put together. Like congressional compromise. No. But I mean, it's so I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong and teach me, but Matthew was the one that had the money, tax collector.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been all alone, kind of anxious or not, things just wasn't exactly right. And everybody kept saying, well, you always have been a real smart kid, that you could do math and all this kind of stuff. And then it goes on, and he's still uncomfortable about, he's doing such a great job according to what they're expecting from him, but yet it wasn't right for him. It just, something was wrong. And then toward the end, when they said, don't you realize that you're very fortunate to be wealthy. You're wealthy. Everybody else is not. Everybody else is, just anything. And what's wrong with you? And what's wrong with you? And all of a sudden, it just seemed to caught him. This is not enough. This is not what I need. I thought everybody else thinks that's the most important thing. Money, having everything that you need. And, of course, and I think the room that they were in, I kept trying to look at it, when his mother or something was showing it to him or something. And the room was had beautiful furniture and all this kind of stuff. And it just wasn't enough for him. And, I think that was just a real wowie, thing for him. And he was so young, he seemed so young to be doing so well and then trying so hard and yet not being successful, and it just, I thought that was a real impressive, just the whole thing that has flown through the middle of it, anything. And it just, in our world, you really do need to, know a whole lot about math and and money and things like that to survive. You need that, and they did too. But anyway, that really was impressive to me, the way they did that.
I think it also showed that he, for the most part, had it all.
Yes.
But this still was not fulfilled.
Yes.
I think another good point that they made.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Nicodemus was the same way, because he's seeing God work in a way that he has not seen. He thought, I sympathize so much with Nicodemus, because, the Pharisees, their job was, they were the religious torchbearers. They were the ones who ensured that the community followed the law. They were the ones who kept reciting the law and told the stories and set the culture around the temple and around the synagogue. And so now someone outside of that setting is now, God is working in a way that is beyond their container. That had to have been hard to imagine that the work of God did not originate at the temple. What? That's where God resides. Oh, you say that again. I couldn't hear that.
They did all of the explanation as to what was going on around people. Mm-hmm. And then for something to happen that went above their explanation was amazing. That it was pretty awesome that something went outside of their way of explaining things.
Yep.
And that's another thing that kind of got Nicodemus thinking.
Yeah.
I'm the one who knows what's going on here, and this is above what I can explain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the only thing I could explain it, I was thinking about it this week, and I thought, imagine if in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, the country starting in 1961 or 2, when Kennedy said, by the end of the decade, we will have a person walk on the moon. And the whole country knew that was NASA's job. Imagine if there was a group in Oregon that landed on the moon first, you know, or somebody in West Virginia that sent a group to the moon. And you're like, wait a minute, this is what NASA does. The whole country expects NASA to do this. And imagine if it's a group from another state somewhere, you know, that's how foreign it would be. Now we have private individuals doing it. But I mean, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there was no way a private individual would have tackled this kind of thing. You know, and so that's how foreign it would be to us. You know,
somebody traveled to the moon from their tool shed. That would be pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just Elon Musk with just a few $1 billion.
Yeah, right.
But now I would say that it was very interesting how they portrayed Nicodemus, that he did go to the red quarter, that he did go do these things that was would be considered unclean by the Jewish culture. And then at the same point in time, and then he has that talk with Shamil, and he says, why are you trying to put God into a box? So I think he recognized that God could do whatever God chooses to do. And I think because of that openness and because of that sincerity, you see him trying to understand more instead of jumping into those conclusions like the other Sadducees and Pharisees did, or at least that's how he's portrayed. Now, was he, from just a pure biblical perspective, is that basically how we kind of perceive from a historical context? This is like how Nicodemus was, as far as, okay, he would have kind of fit the mold that we're kind of, is it an accurate portrayal, I guess, is my question.
I think so. And the reason I would say that is because, one, Nicodemus sticks around. He appears again. So you recognize that the conversation with Jesus did affect him. And then two, the way John portrays it, Nicodemus comes to Jesus under the cover of night. I don't know that certainly the way that they portrayed this might have been plausible. But in John, night and day are two strong symbols. Night kind of symbolizing a cloud of unknowing. You can't see, it's unclear, there's darkness. Whereas, you know, light would be clear, and light shines a light, you know, light shines the way. Darkness is fumbling, you know. And so John, since John does that with his gospel, you get the impression that Nicodemus comes not to trap Jesus or to trick Jesus or to get him, but comes because he really wants to understand and really wants to know. I mean, that's the way John portrays it. And so I think it's very fair what the chosen group has done. The one other thing I would say, though, it's important to remember that not all Pharisees and Sadducees were dead set against Jesus. I mean, certainly a lot of them were, but you know, a lot of these people were like with Nicodemus, even if Jesus wasn't in the picture, going to minister to Mary's needs, they were good-hearted people. I mean, they wanted to preserve the law. They wanted to follow God. They wanted to do, you know, we paint them, you know, you hear Pharisee and you think bad guy, you know, and certainly they were in some ways, but in general, they were the keepers of the law. They were the ones, their job was to keep Israel tied to and reminded of God's work in their midst. Because if you don't keep reminding people, they're going to move on and forget. So they felt like, man, they really got to do this, you know. So the long answer to that, Billy, is I would say it seems fair to me because Nicodemus certainly had questions. How he developed his questions, we don't know. We don't know what he saw, but it's very plausible the way it's been described here. It didn't happen exactly this way, I'm sure, but he saw enough to have questions somehow. I mean, you know, what do y'all think? Does anybody else have a response to that?
And I also think that him going under the cover of night is accurate because he is in a position where he's supposed to know it all. He's supposed to be explaining things.
Mhm.
And so I think him going to be vulnerable in the nighttime is pretty accurate for him not to want people to know that he doesn't know everything.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a good depiction of when he would go to ask questions and to find out more. Is not in front.
Yeah, the
So.
disciples are nervous that Jesus is the one who's got something to lose here, but you're right. Nicodemus has a lot to lose.
Yeah.
They're wanting to protect Jesus, and it's like Nicodemus is the one who's risking a lot.
Yeah.
And it's kind of all along. That's what I was getting at with the other questions that I had. All along you see him wrestling with, could God be working in a way that we haven't thought of and we haven't come up with on our own? Could God be working outside of the structure we've created and the order that we control?
Yeah.
He's been asking those questions all along.
Well,
Oh,
I want to understand, I don't know if it was the wife or whatever was saying, I'm ready to go home. We've been here long enough. I'm so tired of this. And you get all tied up in all of this. And, why can't we go home? I've got children that I hadn't seen in a long time. And I thought, now where does this come into? And I thought to myself that she can't understand that unless she has seen what he has seen. She didn't understand, and she needed to be helped, to understand why. She too needs to have that's a big deal for her. That's a big deal for her, but she can't figure it out. But if she had seen him, that would have made the difference, And I don't know why they kind of threw that in, well, in a way like that. I don't know. Is that
maybe just to kind of show the pressure Nicodemus was under? That we don't know that he had family pressure, but this portrays that there's a lot of pressure on him. He is kind of the authority.
And there's enough inquiry in his own mind that he's not willing just to give it up and go to leave. Yeah. All along, he's been vacillating back and forth with John the Baptist and with Shmuel. He'd say, can't God do something different? Maybe he can. And the wife says, you're sympathizing with this preacher, aren't you? I mean, you're beginning to kind of like him a little bit and follow him. So he's really, he's got enough inquiry that he doesn't want to turn loose of it. Yeah. And I think that was the tension in that particular scene, or that was part of the tension, to say, he's going to keep searching till he finds out. He's still seeking.
Well, there at the end, he when he gets on the knees.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. When he was when he was on his knee and he kissed Jesus's hand there, he quoted some type of verse, and I don't recall. Or does anybody have any reference to that? But then Jesus immediately spouted back like a very comforting verse about the Savior, what is for the Savior to say. Like right back, and it like just comforted him, and he embraced him, and that was a very touching scene. Like that was like, wow. I was very jealous of Nicodemus at that given moment. but he did say something there, and I was just curious.
Yeah, I'll go back and listen. I don't remember what he said. I remember the spot, but I can't remember what he said.
Okay.
One other transition that they had in this, certainly the Nicodemus encounter was the most central one. But Matthew came and followed, and there were two aspects of it. One, you see all that Matthew left his position. The soldier even said, and I'm wondering if this soldier will play back into things later, because there are several instances with soldiers, and they know about Jesus, or they know some way to get to Jesus. So who knows, that guy may show up later. But you see how much he leaves. And the reminder there was, I just thought it was artfully done. He puts on the sandals, and there's a tray there with about 6 pair of sandals. And, in that day, the Jews would have had 1 pair of sandals, period. You would wear your sandals. That's it. He had a choice. But then you see the other side of the story is Peter is like, no, wait a minute. Are you sure this is the person you want to call? To Jesus. What'd y'all think about that?
Yeah. Very realistic, I suspect. I mean, he had been bleeding the Jews dry, as his mother said, and he was a pawn of the Romans and benefiting from it. Is this the kind of person we want in our group when we're trying to be on a mission here? Yeah, I think it's probably very realistic.
And I like what Jesus told Peter there, almost in a little bit of a rebuke, but be prepared to expect different. That's what our Savior does all the time, and it's amazing. Just expect different, because and I love that idea, because that gives hope to people like me.
Hey, Josh, we didn't hear what you had to say right then. What was your thought about that?
Well, I was just thinking the way that Peter was thinking was like, almost like, does he even deserve this? With all that he does to us, does he deserve this? And I think that's a comforting thing for us to see, is that nobody deserves it. Nobody deserves what Jesus did for us, but he did it, So that was almost what Peter was struggling with, I think, was, why does he get to go? Are you sure he can go?
Well, it was, you kind of catch the irony of just 2 weeks ago, Peter is trying to catch some of the other Jewish fishermen, I mean, it's, and it's like, I almost expected Jesus, he didn't, but I almost expected Jesus to say, well, I guess a lot of people could say that about different people in this group, and because none of them were going to be without sin. Well, any other thoughts that y'all have about this episode? We have one more. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've seen that one, so I cannot wait to see how this season concludes. Any other thoughts that you have?
One thing I'll recommend to everybody at home, if they hadn't done it, is the app of The Chosen. They have it's called a deep dive, and basically they take this week was the priest and a Protestant preacher, and they were just discussing why they chose the elements that they did in episode 8. Usually there was a rabbi there as well, so I would recommend that to everybody. As it's about 20 minutes afterwards, and it really breaks it down, and but I would just recommend that to everybody.
Thank you. Yeah. Josh, anything else you have before we sign off?
No, I think we've covered it. It sounds good.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.